Okay, recording started, guys.
Perfect. Okay, so next part we go here through the roles and privileges concepts on HANA. First of all, we have catalog roles. These catalog roles are the roles that you can create directly in the database, in the catalog. You basically do that either going in the HANA Studio, right-clicking on new role, and then specify the name and specifying all the privileges inside and also the roles if you like to nest. Or you can do that as well from the SQL directly using the create role statement and then using the grant privilege to role statement to grant the authorizations. To do that, you need the role admin, and here we come with the limitations that I was mentioning before, and also then the reason why we now suggest not to use this kind of roles in HANA. So first of all, adding privileges to role with the grant option, it's so when you first of all when you add a privilege to a role, you can select if this assignment is grantable or further grantable to others, or if the assignment is only from you to that particular role or from your user to that particular user, and that's it. So there is no authorization for the target user to further grant the same authorization. And if you do that, or this kind of mechanism allows you to create further roles or to create further authorizations related to the same object. So if I create a table, for example, then the table belongs to me. I'm the only one that is authorized on this table. So what I can do is to create a role, or I can assign directly to a user the authorization on this table. And then this user will be able to access the table, obviously on select, on insert, depending on the authorization I assigned, and will only able to access if I did a direct assignment without this grant or admin option. If I use the grant or admin option, the other user will be able to grant itself the authorization on that table to another one. So it's a kind of chain. I can decide when I do that. But the problem is that this also implies the fact that when I create a role, if I would like to assign to this role an authorization, I have to have the same authorization assigned to my user in able to do that, because this chain works when I create the role and also when I assign authorizations to privilege when I assign authorization to users. Sorry, and so every time I assign authorization, or I try to assign an authorization either to a role or to a user, I need to have myself the authorization. And obviously this is a classical violation of the segregation of duties, because I cannot be authorized to everything that I need to authorize to others. But that's the way the basic database works, and that's the way so the catalog role concept works as well. The other thing is that when I create a new role as catalog role, I also have the role afterwards. So if I'm the creator of this role, I'm also assigned to the role automatically. So you can really easily understand that that's not achievable from a security perspective, or that's not feasible from a security perspective, because in this case I cannot keep any segregation of the different roles and authorization in the system, because basically the role creator or the role administrator will have to be a really powerful user in the system in order to do his job and to create and assign roles. Another thing related to the catalog roles, another limitation, is that with catalog roles, whoever grant a particular role to a user is also the owner of this particular assignment. So here there is an example. There is Richard, user Richard in the system, grant the test role to the user test user. And then this relationship between this role, test role, and the user, test user, as Richard as grantor. So Richard is the people who established this relationship, is also the only person who can revoke or remove this relationship. Because you see here in the example, if system tries to remove this relationship, so if system tries to revoke the role to the user, the statement is okay, but the user is still there. The assignment between this user and role is still there. That's all related to the chain of authorizations and the ownership of objects that we have in the database. So with this concept and managing roles directly inside the database, with this concept, we have these kind of limitations. So what is the solution to all of these limitations? The solution is the use of repository roles. That means there is a different way to create roles. We can define a role from a design time perspective. So we develop the content of a specific role. And then basically when this role is developed and ready, we can activate the role from the repository. And like all the other objects that we can develop in the repository, this activation will result on the creation of the catalog role corresponding to this repository role directly on the catalog. So in the same location we have all the other roles. But this execution, this creation, will not be executed by the user who is developing the role in the repository, but will be executed by a technical user. It's one of the internal database users that we have seen before. It's called _sys_repo. This internal database user is the owner of the repository, and it's also the only user that will be used at runtime, so in the catalog, to create the role. When this is done, basically, all the limitations that we have seen before disappear because this is the only user who perform actions in the catalog. So basically, every time that I change my role, I do that in the repository. I assign a new authorization, and then simply activating the new version or the new role, the catalog role will be generated by sysrepo. And also the other limitation that we have seen before about the assignments of roles to users also disappears with this concept, because will be directly sysrepo to assign this role to users, because sysrepo is the only one authorized basically to these particular roles that have been generated from the repository. So every time that I ask, that I try to grant a particular role to a particular user, instead of being directly my user to do that, will be sysrepo to do that. And this, in a way, centralize the management, the management of all the roles, because all the roles belongs to the same user, and also can centralize all the grant and revoke actions, because they are all performed by the same technical user. So all this framework related to repository roles, it's there exactly to solve and to enable you to work with roles exactly in the same way you are probably working in the other environments. Questions on that?
Yeah, just
yeah.
So I've understood or followed the challenges of the catalog roles and creating them and stuff. But what happens if we have these objects, or users create objects themselves, not necessarily even could even be more than roles? You delete that user. What happens to the objects they've created?
Yeah, so that's part of my workshop anyhow afterwards. But it's important to understand this. You're right. So the object ownership works in a way that if you delete a user who created objects in the database, like a table, for example, then also the objects belonging to this user will be deleted from the system. Or to better say, when you delete a user, when you drop a user from the database, you have two ways to do that. One is a simple drop, when you say, or when you simply try to drop a user, but this simple drop works only if the user has no objects that are related to his ownership. So if the user has no objects assigned to him or with his ownership, then you can simply drop the user. But if there are objects under his ownership, then the only way to drop the user is a drop cascade. That means you drop the user, and together with the user, all the other objects assigned to it. So that's another reason why the repository, in this case, not only roles, but the repository objects in general, are the suggested way or recommended way to go for SAP, because if you do that, then the objects belongs to sysrepo. Sysrepo is an internal database user that will never be deleted from the system and will be always there. So then the role or the other objects, the table, whatever other objects, does not belong to the creator of this object, and that's exactly the way to avoid any issue with ownership.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, if not, I would like just to underline the two important things, main important things related to repository roles. So the one is this, the coupling between the creation of the role and also between the granting and revoking and the user who created. So all these things are now decoupled with repository roles, because as said, the catalog roles generated from the activation belongs to sysrepo and not to the user who created the role. The other thing that is really important is the thing that when you create a repository role, you are also creating an object that is transportable, like all the other objects in the repository. So everything that is created from the repository can be transported across the environment. What will be transported in this case, so we said with repository roles, we basically have the definition of the role, that's the repository object, and then we have the catalog role generated from this, from the activation of the repository role, of the definition of the role. Then with the transport, basically what we transport is the repository object itself. So we transport the definition of this role across the environments, and then on each environment this definition will be activated, and the activation will generate the catalog role, so the role that we can then use and assign in this environment as well. So we always transport the definition and not the catalog role, and we can do that only if we work with repository, because obviously the catalog role itself is not transportable. Okay, that's how it looks like in the system from a transport point of view. So basically what I can do related to repository role is I can create the role. I can do that in the studio from a particular perspective called development perspective, which I can use to work in the repository directly and generate the role. And I can then, still talking about repository roles, create these roles from the web IDE. We will see that these two methods are really different, because in this case I need to code the content of the role, so there is a specific syntax that I need to use. for that. And in this case, for the web IDE, then I can do it also graphically. So there is a graphical view that I can use to create a repository role in a way that is really similar to the graphical environment I have in HANA Studio to create the catalog role. When I do that, basically I will save my role in the repository under a specific package. Maybe there is also a sub-package. Afterward we will see that in detail. And this role, from a technical point of view, it's a file with the HTTP role extension. This file then, together with the package, can be transported to another environment. And as said, when the transport is done, there will be also the activation in this environment, and the activation will generate the catalog role related to this repository role.
Alessandro?
Yes.
When you do the transport, do you transport the entire package or sub-package, or can you just take the role, or how does it work?
Yeah, good question. So there are two ways to work in HANA related to transport. The standard way, it's enabled by default and allows you to transport the entire content of the packages you select. You see here that there is something called delivery unit. Basically, the delivery unit is what you can really transport at the end using this standard method. So you create in your dev environment a delivery unit, a new delivery unit, and then you can assign to this delivery unit one or more than one package. And when you transport the delivery unit, basically the entire content of this package or packages assigned to the delivery unit will be transported as well. So that's a way to mass transport everything. To do a transport per object, so only on single objects, you need first of all to change the configuration of your system, recording the changes that you do. So means that basically you activate a functionality. The functionality is available in the application lifecycle manager. That is the central application from which you can manage all these things, including, for example, the delivery unit creation. And in this application, there is a flag that you can activate. Basically, if you activate this flag, it's a little bit like in the ABAP environment, if you are familiar with that, when you set a specific client to record the changes. So this means basically every time that you activate something in the repository, so every time that I finish or complete the work for a specific role and then I click on activate, the system either on the studio or in the web ID will ask me what is the change in which I would like to record this modification or this creation I've just done. Then what I can do is I can transport these changes instead of transporting the entire delivery unit. So it's really similar to a transport request or change request concept that we have in the ABAP environment. But obviously, you need to select one of the two options, and in case you select these record changes, you need to take care about these changes that you need to create first of all, then you need to assign users to these changes, and then you have to make sure that all your developers or modelers select the right change when they do some modification, some change in the system.
Okay. John, I don't know if it's a quick answer. Which
Sure.
of these do we use?
We're using the native HANA transport setup, so with change lists.
Okay. Thank you.
So you would get prompted for a change list, although we haven't done our first transport yet. Just, there's a couple of bugs, but yeah, that's the method we're going to use.
Okay, thanks.
Perfect. Okay. So with the type of transport you are using right now, basically every time that you change particular objects in your package, then you will have to transport again the entire package. Okay. Perfect. So in terms of user interface, I mentioned before, so We have this repository role editor that's available only in the web IDE interface, and you see here. Yes.
If we're going to talk, I don't know how many more slides you got. If we start talking about what the UI looks, I mean, it might be better just to jump into a system. So I'm not sure how much further you're going. I don't know how many more slides, but instead of spending time talking about a slide and UI, I mean, maybe we can skip this and come back. I don't know how central it is.
Yeah, sure. No, it's really simple. So basically, okay, that's the web IDE of an internal system where we will do the demonstration today. So before going on with the rest, just let me show you. Basically, if you call the address of your HANA environment /SIP HANA IDE, you are in the web-based development workbench. Here you have different type of views. You can also then afterwards switch between them. The thing that we are interested on now is the editor, where we can create different type of objects directly in the repository. So it's the, let's call it repository editor. We have also a security here. Catalog, where you can work directly on the catalog instead of working in the repository, and something to enable and read the content of traces. So let me show you maybe quickly the security part.
Alessandro, can I just ask? It's Anthony.
Sure.
Subhash, are you still on this call? I was trying to ping you a little bit earlier. I know this was the bit that you wanted to see.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So just to show you, so that's the studio. I'm connecting exactly to the same system. And here, if I expand the security folder, I have the security console. That's the console containing all the configuration. Now I'm not authorized to everything here. Auditing, password policy, this is the one we have seen before. We can configure SAML identity provider and do the data volume encryption. And then I have the users here, the list of users in my system. I can manage the users, opening one of them and changing everything related to this user, validity, the session client we were talking before, additional user parameter. I can activate and deactivate the user from here. I can activate the authentication methods from here. Some authentication methods are straightforward. I just need to activate. Some others needs to have some additional thing like the external ID for the Kerberos, that is the user in the Active Directory, validity, and then we have the roles assigned to this user, and potentially also the privileges assigned directly to a user. By default, I said that every user has its own schema and can create objects in its own schema by default. And then we have all the other type of privileges. Obviously, as said before, it's not suggested to assign authorizations directly on a user level, but using role. And talking about role, basically, we have here this public that is assigned by default, and then in this case, someone, in particular, this user, assign this additional role to this user here. Okay, that's about the user, and we have then
We've lost your audio, Alessandro. Can you hear me? Can anyone else hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, Alessandro. Are you there, please?
do you see my screen? Yeah? Hi.
I've just got the audio back, but your screen's disappeared.
Ah, okay. Okay, so present desktop. Okay, should be back. Okay, it's connecting. Okay, currently presenting, perfect. You should now see the screen again.
Screen's loading for me.
Okay.
Just come up.
Perfect. So here we have the list of roles available. I'm still in the Hana Studio under security. So here I have the list of roles. I told you that there are two types of roles, catalog or roles created directly from the catalog. So directly here doing this option here, new role, or roles created from the repository. They are really easy to be identified because when I create a role directly in the catalog, I just need to specify the name of the role, and here I will see directly the name of the role without anything else. When I create a role from the repository, basically in that case, I can assign whatever name to the role.
I think we've lost him again.
Hi, do you hear me?
No, there you go. Yeah. So, yes, I hear you now.
Good. I don't know what's happening. Okay, let's see.
Network connectivity dropping every once in a while. Just maybe just be aware, Alessandro. Just check that we're all still here as you continue.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Your screen has stopped sharing now. You need to reshare.
Okay. Yeah. I will share it again. Do you see my screen now again?
Yeah, it's back.
I do,
okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. I was just saying that a first easy way to distinguish between roles created directly in the catalog or in the repository is the name itself, because the name of a role created directly in the catalog is just here, the name of the role defined during the creation. If you have a role created from the repository, then the name is, first of all, the package where this role was created. So, for example, here the role was created in Hana COE dot this package dot this other package, and then the name assigned to this role is test. If I open the role definition, I can also see from here that is this repository role. So I cannot change here the content of this role because it was created in the repository. It belongs to this repo, and I cannot change the content of this role now from here, so from the catalog directly. On the web part here, so we have this different views, these different applications that we can use. And basically, when I open, for example, the security part, you see here that I have exactly the same functionality that I have in my HANA Studio under the security folder. So I can open the security console with the same configuration options, for example, the password policy. I can here expand the list of users and work with users, so change content and assign different roles, for example, to these users. And I can also open the list of roles and see the content of a particular role, or potentially create a new catalog role still, because that's exactly the same functionality I have in HANA. So still from here I can create only catalog roles. Okay, that's it. Then we have this editor. This was the application that was in the slides. And if I click here, I basically open this editor. Just a second, it's loading. And basically this editor is not there just for roles. Obviously, it's there for modeling or development in general in HANA. So everyone that needs to work with the repository can use this web IDE to work and create objects. And basically, the new feature coming with already SPS 9 is the possibility to now, apart from the other objects types, so like views, analytic views, calculation views, I can also now create roles. So, for example, if I go under my package in this system, here, you will see all the objects that I have in my package, and basically there are different objects types. The extension here in the web ID gives me the object type that I'm checking, and we said that HDB role is it's basically the extension for the roles, for the repository roles that I can create. And so here you can see that I have created already some roles, and on top of that, what I can do is create a new role. Now the system will ask me what is the role name that I would like to use. So I can say role test 2. For example, I say create. Okay, now I have the role created. So far it's just saved in the repository. That means it's not yet active or not yet activated. That means it's only on the repository so far. Then you see that graphically it's really similar to the interface we would have in Hana Studio creating a new catalog role. So I have here the list of roles that I would like to assign to this role, and then I can assign specific privileges to it. That's it. And basically, for example, I can assign whatever system privileges to that role, for example, the catalog read. And then when I save, this will save and activate the role. You see here in the trace part that my role was saved, but also activated. Activated means basically that the role now is also available in my catalog, because the activation performed by sysrepo activated this particular role, and the activation generated the role also in my catalog. Now it will be really difficult for me to find it, but anyhow, here we are, role test 2 created under Hana COE, and this path here. So I can now open the definition of the role directly from the catalog, and I see here that I don't have any roles assigned to it, but if I go to system privilege, I have the catalog read assigned, and you see that was sysrepo to perform this action. So even if my user, so I did that with IE 30 to 2623, that is my user ID in this environment. Even if I did that on the catalog, so after the activation, the grantor for this particular privilege was directly sysrepo. So now I have a role, I have it here, I have it also in the studio. If I go here and search for a particular role, that's exactly the same view, just a different client. So I will find exactly the same role test 2. And so now that this role is here, you see that it's a repository role. I still have the catalog read that I assigned. Now that I have this role here, I can basically just assign the role to users. And this assignment, being this repository role, will be done automatically using a store procedure instead of using the grant role to user command, because this wouldn't work being this repository role, so not belonging to my user. This store procedure will basically assign the role to the user using sysrepo. I can do that still from the graphical environment, so I can go to a particular user here, whatever user, and assign this privilege directly. I'm not sure if I'm authorized to do that, but let's try. Okay. Okay, yes, I'm authorized. So now the role that I just generated was assigned to my user, but look at this, now the grantor is not my user. So I perform this action still using my user, this one. So I'm connecting to this system using this user, but anyhow, when I change the user, I'm changing the change itself, so the grant to the user is performed with this repo. So in this way, any repository user with the right authorization can be assigned to a user, and any other user now can revoke this role to this user without having any issue. So obviously, it's, yes. Sure.
So I gather through the UI, the stored procedure is called automatically when you try and assign the. I mean, how does the system know that it must use the grant or assist repo because you didn't call it, you didn't use it? I mean,
yeah.
If I do it the other way around, it says it's got my user ID or something.
Yeah, exactly. So this depends on the type of role you are trying to authorize. So the system, in the same way, knows if a particular role, when I open it, is a standard role or a repository role. Also, when you try to assign a role, first of all, check if the role is a catalog or a repository role. If it's a catalog role, assign directly the role to the user with the grant command in the background. So grant this role to user. If it's a repository role, then the user interface actually, so the Hana Studio or the Web IDE, they know that this is a repository role, then they call the store procedure. Store procedure that is called grant activated role. And so the store procedure is not relevant here when you are performing actions. It's only relevant when you have to authorize a particular user to assign roles to users, because then you have to authorize also this store procedure. So here it's not relevant because it's the system to decide how to proceed for you. It's relevant when you generate a role for someone that has to assign roles to users.
Didn't quite follow that. Could you maybe, I don't know, can you give an example, practical example, or just?
Yeah, sure. Now I used a particular user, and so I used a particular user to authorize or to grant this particular role to a user. When I do that, the system basically decide if or check if the role is a standard role, like for example this role here, or if it's a repository role. So if I open this one, I don't see anything here. That means it's a standard role, catalog role created directly in the catalog. If I open another role, like for example this one, then it's a repository role. So whenever I grant a particular role to a user, the system checks these two things. So if it's a standard or a repository role, then if it's a standard role, I should have the command here somewhere. Let me check. Execute in the back. No, I have the other one. Okay, execute in the back just a command like grant ABAP_admin to, and then the user name. This command here in the back. It's a direct grant, so it's just a grant of this.
If you want to assign a catalog role to a user as sysrepo, you need to do it through a SQL statement, and then is that correct?
When you need to assign a repository role to a user, you can do it from the graphical interface, but you need to be authorized. So the user who performed the grant needs to be authorized to execute this store procedure.
Okay.
because this is the store procedure that will be called in the back. So that's not relevant for the user who performed the action, because the action is transparent. So you just assign a role to a user and it is performed anyhow. Either this is a catalog or a repository, but in the background, if this is a catalog, this is the action that your HANA Studio or Web IDE is trying to perform. So it's a direct assignment, role to user. If, on the other end, it's a repository role, the call that your user interface is executing on the database is basically a store procedure call. So grant activated role with the name of the role, that's a repository role, to a particular user. So basically, the user who is performing this action graphically in the user interface here in the HANA Studio or in the web has to have this store procedure assigned to his user. Otherwise, as an authorization, I mean, so you have to have this store procedure assigned with an execute on this store procedure that I can show you here. For example, should have here a role that I create for the example. Okay, security, then we have all the roles, and here common roles. Sorry, it's not here, give me just a second. It's in my, okay. Here we are. Here we are, okay. That's a role that I have already created in the past, and basically here in the object privileges of this role, to make sure that that particular user with this role assigned can assign roles to user, you have to authorize these two store procedure. So grant activated role for the grant, and then there is also a revoke if you would like to authorize the revoke. So we have grant activated role is a store procedure. I select that, and then I say execute. When I do that, then my user, the user who has this particular role assigned, will be able from the graphical interface, without using explicitly the store procedure, but will be able to assign any repository role to any user.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that it's complex, so sometimes it's not easy or immediate to understand. But yeah, that's the way it's working in the background. Before they changed basically the user interface, it was really required to call the repository, the store procedure basically for the repository role. So you had to, instead of going in the user interface to just execute the action, you had really to call the store procedure using this command to assign the repository roles to the user. But now, since SPS 8, this is all integrated in HANA Studio and also in the web interface. So you just do the action and the system takes care of understanding if it's a repository or catalog.
Okay, so that stored procedure effectively runs under sys_reader, or it's got to execute that user.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. If you wouldn't mind going back to the package display, the hierarchy. So, what's the sort of best practice there in terms of where you build roles? Do you create a separate package for security roles and sub-package, or do you build roles into the I don't know, the reporting packages or whatever they are?
Yeah, so that's really important. There are two main things. So obviously you can choose this. So you can choose if you would like to have only one package with all your roles, including also the project-specific or application-specific role, or if you would like to have a central location. I normally use a central location, and also from an SAP point of view, that's better, because if we deliver some standard roles or some template roles, like in this case, then we don't need to spread the roles on all the packages, but there is a central location. That's also good because if you then need to transport roles from one environment to another, you can only transport the content of your security part and for a specific package or for the entire role part, and then every role is transported as well. But from my experience, that really depends also on the customer, because I have customer that says we would like to have an application developed or a data mart scenario developed that is consistent, so that has in the package of this application everything inside, including the role, including the authorization. So if you do so, then you would then split somehow the package for the roles in all the different applications. The only thing that is really important, whatever is the option you select, it's how to organize then the package for the roles, because it's really important to split all the type of roles that you have in different packages. That's just an example where we have admin, developers, and users. Hana CO, it's for internal users, modeling, repository support, because this helps you a lot maintaining the roles then, and also transporting, because if we think about the scenario we mentioned before, when you have to transport particular roles, and to do that you have to transport the entire package. If you have other roles that are still work in progress, or where you are still working on, and you don't would like to transport those roles as well together with the transport you're doing now, if you have everything really well structured here, you can simply transport the content of this package or whatever other. If not, then if you don't have any package, you just have all the roles in package role, then you need to transport everything together. So it's important to organize, and obviously that's a simple environment where end user is just one package with one set of roles. In the reality, if you have more than one project working, you would have maybe end users and then the different sub-package for the different applications. Because obviously also in that case, you would like to structure what you are doing for the different projects.
So two questions on that. Firstly is, if we put the roles in the same package as the application, then presumably would we need to do some special stuff to ensure that developers of the application can't adjust the roles or change the design or something?
Yeah, about that, let me maybe then go back a little bit to the theoretical part. So we first of all check what does it mean to authorize users on the different packages, and then we come back to this question, if you agree.
Let me ask my second question.
Yeah, sure.
Was
or otherwise I can answer your first question and then we go through the theory. The answer is that basically it depends on the structure that you have in your repository, because by default, if you authorize a specific package to a user like your developers, all the sub-packages are authorized by default. So it depends on how you organize your content. If you put the roles in the same package where you also have the application development, but if you split the package containing the roles from the package containing the real content of your application, an example can be that you have your package with your application one and then a sub-package called security, where you maintain everything related to security. Another one called, I don't know, application content or content, where you place all your views and developments. Then if you authorize your developers to work only on this content package and not on the security package, they wouldn't be able to change the content of your role, even if they are in the same package as the application. So it really depends on how you assign the authorization, and you have to pay attention on this mechanism that says if I assign, in this example, authorization on HANA, by default the user will be authorized also to TA and XS because they are sub-packages of HANA, but they will not be authorized to UI5, for example, because this is on the same level and is not explicitly authorized.
Okay. So when we start now, if we're thinking about packages in this, then can you sort of wildcard the package access? So let's say, for example, we said, okay, you can have access to all packages star.hana or something, and everything underneath it. Because otherwise, I guess, we might have to, if people structure their packages to make it easier for transporting, we'd have to build a different role per package. Potentially, if we've got, or keep adding in every time a new package is added onto the system, presumably we'd have to add that authorizations for that package into a role.
So two things. First one is we don't have wildcard, so you cannot say authorize all the package beginning with a certain pattern or having a certain pattern. The second thing is if you create a package that is the package for that specific application, and then you authorize your developers to work on that specific package only, then you don't need to provide them further authorizations on that because they will be able to work from this package on. That means they will be able also to further structure the package, creating other sub-packages, but this will be automatically authorized for them because let's assume I decide that this HANA, here in the example, this HANA package is authorized for some developers, and they then create TA and XS inside this package. These two packages will be authorized anyhow due to the concept that every sub-package is authorized by default if you have the original package, the higher level package authorized, so you don't need to do so. Obviously, on the other hand, if they decide to create another package called UI5 that is on the same level as HANA, they need to have authorization on this package on SIP, because otherwise no one can create, having the authorization only on this one, can create UI5. So in my experience, you never have the situation where someone creates something new that was not existing before but is not authorized, because anyone can only create under the package that is authorized to.
I guess it depends on how does it not depend on how we might segregate? So if we have different development teams or something, and now we want to, I guess it depends on how low level of control you want to keep down. So let's say we had HANA was one project and UI5 was another project. When we segregated it because they're different development teams now for whatever reason. In fact, it's one development team. Then I'd either have to give them, change the roles or add new privileges into existing roles. So every time a new package is created at the HANA level, then I'd have to add those privileges in if somebody wanted to break down their structure further. If you have a structured hierarchy, I guess.
Yeah, if it's
think about that hierarchy to work out how you might want to segregate responsibilities.
Yeah, that's correct. And if you assign to a developer or a project a specific package, they will be able to work inside this package and further create other packages inside, but they will not be able to create content on the same level or on higher level. So if you change this principle and you decide that they need to be able to do that, then you have to change the role. Yeah, assigning another package or maybe assigning the higher level package in the hierarchy, and then they will be able to do so. But this has to be done explicitly. It cannot be just a white card.
And I presume once this package structure is maintained, you can't move it because it has quite an implicit part of the security. So if they wanted to put some of that existing logic somewhere else, they would have to. You can't just drag and drop the package to a different sub-package, can you? You'd have to copy it and rebuild the roles and everything.
So you can also here, the different things. Potentially, with the right authorizations, you can relocate content from one package to another, or even you can relocate one package from one location to another with all the objects inside. But to do that, you need the read authorization on the package that you would like to move, and the write authorization, so the authorization to change something on the target package. So potentially in the system, technically speaking, this can be done, but obviously it's restricted by the authorization. So again, if you authorized your team to work on HANA only, obviously they cannot copy something from here to UI5, because this is not a package where they are authorized to write something, to change something.
If I move it though, and I access to that package or that application in that folder, if I move it, does that role has to be changed? Because I'm presuming the role is referring to that package and elements in that package.
If you
get dynamically updated.
No, will not be dynamically updated. If you decide to move objects from one package to another, and then you would like to authorize your developer or your project to work also in that package, then you have to change the role, giving the other package instead of the current one.
Okay. And if we think about a production system with end users, is that the same impact? I mean, if they move the package around in development, and let's say they've got broad access, if they move that then to production without having realized that, well, that they had context security, does then the production end users fail because their role would be based on the previous package definition?
So yes, that's correct. But in the real case, if we are talking about the reality, the end users in production normally don't have any authorization on packages, because that's the repository. So it's the design time work environment. Then out of these objects that you develop in the repository, you have the real objects in the catalog, and normally the real objects in the catalog will be authorized for users.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I think that answered both my questions.
Okay. Other questions? No. If not, I go quickly through these things that we have anyhow already seen somehow. Okay. So let me go through that. For example, we have seen before that there is a security concept related to object ownership in the catalog directly. So if a user creates whatever object in the catalog directly, so like in this case, this user created a table here, this other user created a schema and then a table inside the schema. When I drop, so when I say I would like to drop the user Jim or the user Bill, I can only drop those users with a cascade option, because that's the only way to drop a user that has some catalog objects that are owned by him. So basically, when this user owns something, the only way will be to drop it cascade. When I drop user Jim, user Jim will be deleted, schema Jim, that is the schema associated to him, will be deleted, but also the table that is located in another schema, but that doesn't matter, because the only thing that matters is who is the owner of this table. So also this table will be deleted from the system. Same for Bill. If I drop the user Bill from the system, this removes obviously user Bill, its own schema, but also the other schema he created together with the table. So there is always this dependency between the user who creates a particular catalog objects and the object itself. If you do a drop from the graphical interface, basically you can also see the dependency. So you can decide if you would like to do a normal drop or a cascade. If you select cascade, then you see the list of objects that will be deleted together with the user.
Can you, presumably if we remove, or maybe that's what you're going to come to, can I remove the ability to create an object under my own name? or is that not desirable? I mean, I'm just trying to think about it, so that you never have this issue, or is that not practical from a development perspective or something?
So you have by default only the authorization when you create a new user. This user will have only the authorization to delete things in its, to create things in its own schema, but that doesn't really matter because you would never transport a schema for a particular user. But all the other objects, so for example, here in the example, user Bill created a schema. To create a schema, you need a specific authorization. It's a system privilege that allows you to create new schemas. Same is after you create the schema, you need to create this user created a table. To create a table, you need a specific authorization, create table in this specific schema. So if this is not assigned to the user would never be able to create additional schemas and additional objects in the schema. So yeah, by default they are not authorized, and if you don't assign any additional privileges to the objects, so the object privileges, they will not be able to do so.
Okay.
If you would like, furthermore, if you would like the user to be even not able to create content in its own schema, you can create a restricted user. A restricted user by default cannot even create content in its own schema. Okay. Still about information about this object ownership concept. Here there are a couple of queries that you can execute on the system to see all the objects associated to a particular user, so owned by a particular user. And for schema roles, there are additional tables. So here you see the list of all the object types except for schema and roles that are maintained in a different view. So here there is a view roles and a view schemas, and you can always refer to these views to check what is the current status in your system. So if there are objects owned by particular users, or even selecting a particular object to check who is the owner. Okay, transportation of roles, it can be done when you develop repository roles. Then you can transport those using 3 different ways: CTS Plus, the classical ABAP transports with something called Hana Transport Container that is available only if you have a system running directly on Hana as a database, or the Hana native transports with the XS application, the application lifecycle manager we have seen before. Okay, from SPS 10, we also have in the web part an application that is there only with the purpose to assign users to roles. You have seen that the standard application available in the web, it's still related to the same look and feel that we have in Hana Studio. Here they develop an application that is more user-friendly. You just have to select your user and then the role. This can even be used from iPad or whatever other device because it's a UI5 application. Okay, quickly in terms of privileges. So we have already seen the concept, so I will go really quick here. We have object privileges. These are privileges on objects in the database. So whatever object that you have in your catalog, schema, table, whatever can be selected here as an object privilege. And then you have to specify the statement type or the action that a user can execute on that particular object. Obviously, depending on the type of objects, you have different type of statement of action. For example, I can execute a store procedure. I cannot execute a table. I can only select from a table. So the type of actions are different depending on the object. Oh, sorry. Something happened. Okay. Then we have system privileges. These are actions in the database. I will show you here what are the type of actions. So with system privileges, I can authorize actions on users and roles. We have already seen this user admin, role admin system privilege that is there to enable user to manage other users or to manage catalog roles. Then there are the catalog and schema management, like for example the possibility to create a new schema in the database. That's another system privilege. The auditing part, so the audit logging functionalities can be changed or assessed only with this particular system privileges. Then system management, that is most related to the basis part, so with backup, recovery, change configuration and things like that. And then we have the data import and export from the system, so the possibility to perform export or import of the data. That's an example of the catalog and schema management, where we have, for example, create schema that allows to create new schema, data admin to administer the data, and catalog read to read the content of all the metadata from the database. Package privileges, that's what we have discussed. So basically, it's really simple. I select my package, and then I select what are the actions that I would like to authorize for this particular package. You see here the actions. We have the repo.read. That's the authorization to read the content of this particular package. So I will be able to list all the objects in this particular package, plus open the definition of all these objects. Means if I have created a view, I can open the definition of the view, seeing what is the content and what are all the different fields and structure in this view. Obviously, I cannot access the view itself, so I cannot preview the content of this view in terms of data. I can only preview the repository object, so the structure. Then I have the authorizations on the native objects. And on the native objects, that means objects created exactly in this system. I can do the edit, that means I can change the content. Oh, sorry, here there is an error. Maintain is the second one, and the maintain is there basically to have the possibility also to maintain the content of the package. That means, for example, create further package inside this one. And then I have the activate, that basically gives me the possibility to activate objects, so not just change the objects, but also activate. I have the same with the non-native objects, so the objects that I have imported from other systems. Here,
just
yes.
a question, sorry.
Sure.
Go back one slide. So,
sorry, it's really going crazy. Sorry. Okay. I come back, yes.
Yeah, so we spoke about package privileges and object privileges. If you go to the if you go back to the square, one more back, I think. No, one more. Object privileges. So from a security design perspective, can I say, well, I want someone to have access only to these three packages, but I'm happy to have them, but I can give them access to all objects, and then they can have access to all objects in those three packages, or do I have to relate them together somehow?
So it's really important that you ask this question, because there is a really big difference between this one and this one. So objects here are only catalog objects or SQL objects. In the other end, these package privileges are related to repository. So we are talking about two different things in this case. Let me show you this one here directly on the system. So I have two different folders in the system. One is called catalog. That's where the object privileges applies, basically. So I have my catalog, I have my schemas. Inside the particular schema, I can have views, I can have models, I can have function indexes, tables, views, all these things. And with object privileges, I can say that a user is authorized to, for example, see the entire content of this schema, or to see only a particular table in this schema, and so on and so forth. So I can manage authorizations with object privileges in this section here, the catalog, so the real content of my database. With package privileges, so now this user is not authorized, but this is authorized. With on the other end, with the package privileges, I can authorize users to see and work with the content of the repository. And the repository, that is everything that is here in this folder content, is not the real content of my database. So it's not the list of tables and views, but it's just the list of design time objects. So in this kind of repository, in this folder, I can find only design time objects. So the definition of a particular view, the definition of a particular role, what we have seen before, the repository roles, the definition of a table, but not the table itself. So from so that the two authorizations are working on two different parts of my database. One is the real content with schemas, tables, and procedure. The other one, the package privileges for my repository.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. So package privileges. Here we have the concept of sub-packages. The concept is really important because, as said before, if I authorize a package for a particular user, automatically all the sub-packages, regardless what is the hierarchy level, are authorized as well. And that's something I cannot change. So I cannot say you are authorized to a particular package, but not to a particular sub-package inside this package. That's not possible. So when I select or when I choose and design my package structure in the system, I'm also deciding how I will be then able to authorize people on the different packages, because depending if there are sub-packages or packages in the same level, I will be able to distinguish or not the authorization. Here you
package. Is the person responsible there then that the owner?
No, it's not, because in the repository there is no ownership. So it's just how to say, a label, a property that everyone will be able to see, but it's not the owner. So you can delete this, drop this user from the system, and nothing will happen. Basically, he will be still responsible for that package because it's more a label or a way to organize the package than a real technical constraint. Mm-hmm. Okay, then we said that for packages, or for package privileges, there are two types of authorization. One is on native and the other one is on imported. That's the difference between native and imported. So if I create a package or an object directly in one system, then this is a native object because it was created there. If I export then this particular package with all the objects in another one, then this in the system 2 that we have here will be a imported package. So means I have a different authorization that I can assign to these particular objects on the package privileges. Okay. Last type of privileges, and that's probably one of the most difficult one in terms of structure and options and features, is the analytic privilege. I hope you are already familiar, at least a little bit, with the concept of attribute view, analytic view, and calculation views. Because then it's easy to understand. Basically, these are views available on Hana native that you can create directly on Hana, and are there basically to provide you the capability to build some data mart, we call it, or some anyhow structure, OLAP structure directly in Hana database. Then to see the content of this views that you can create in the system, SAP decided to create a concept called analytic privileges. So basically the analytic privileges are there to provide you the capability to authorize users to access these particular views. There are, I would say, two types of access that you can grant with analytic privileges to these specific views. One is the full access, so you can say, okay, one specific analytic view that I developed is completely authorized, so that the user can see the entire content of this view. Or you can also restrict the access using still the same concept, analytic privilege, to row-level security. So in this case, with row-level security, the user will be able to access the view, but only with a particular filter or restriction in the access. So will not be able to see everything, but just a part of it. Okay, when you do so, let me first of all, before going on, show you an example so we see something directly on the system as an example of what I just mentioned. The first important thing related to analytic privileges is that basically the analytic privileges are not objects that you can directly assign to roles and users, but they are repository objects themselves. So first of all, you will need to define an analytic privilege with the list of views that you would like to authorize, with the list of restrictions if you have some restrictions. And then when you have this analytic privilege created in the system, then you can assign this to a role. So we have seen before for object privileges and for example, system privileges, you just need to select your object or select your system privilege, and then you can assign it directly. In this case, you have first of all to create an object called analytic privilege. You can do that only on the repository. In this case, there is no double maintenance, so it's only on the repository. That's the only part or framework where you do that, when you can do that. And when this is done, basically then the object, the analytic privilege, can be assigned to a role. That's an example of one analytic privilege. So the analytic privilege has different parts. You have basically here on the left the list of views. And this is basically the list of views that are authorized for this particular analytic privilege. So in this case, only one, but it can be more than one. I can select different views, and all these views will be authorized with the same analytic privilege. I have some validity that I can restrict as well. So I can say that a particular analytic privilege is valid only on a particular time frame. I have the name and the label, and then I have here the part related to the restriction. So this means that this particular analytic privilege can be used in different ways, like the role we mentioned before. So I can either say, okay, I create an analytic privilege, I list some of the views here, and then I don't change anything here, and this means this analytic privilege, when I activate it, will be able to give me the authorization on the entire view AN_budget, or as a different usage of this object, analytic privilege, I can also say, okay, I create the analytic privilege, I assign the view, and then I assign as well some restrictions. In this case, if you assign restriction, you have to select the attribute, so the column in my view that I would like to restrict. And then here in the assign restriction for this column, so selecting this column, I can define a list of restrictions. In my case, it's a really simple restriction. I said that I would like this column to be filtered only on the values that are equal HR1. That's the business unit code, so that's the HR department. And so in this case, I would be able to see in my view, when I open the view, if I have this analytic privilege assigned, only the rows where the column business unit code is equal HR1.
Okay. this is more like the traditional ABAP model current. That's so define an analytic privilege, define the fields that you want to control on, and then define which values are restricted.
Exactly. It's really similar to, for example, it's really similar to the concept of analysis authorization on BW. Yeah. So to follow on the slides, basically I can also then combine different authorizations or different restrictions. I can do it in the same view. So in the same privilege, I can do it on several analytic privileges, and obviously the combination change. So if I assign in the same privilege two different restrictions for the same column, for the same attribute, then I will have an AND concatenation between them. If I do it in two different analytic privileges, will be an OR combination. So I will see all this constraint plus this constraint. If I do it here in the same privilege, I will see only the columns where both the constraints are true at the same time. So that's important when you design that. Yes, sure.
Yeah, no, that was the initial. That's sort of addressing the initial, similar to the same BW issue with analysis source that said, okay, well, I don't want to see the union all the time, necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like analytic privileges, and I see one or the other, not the union of both of them.
Yeah, exactly. And then to enable this different behavior, you just need to organize in a different way the constraints, having one or more than one analytic privilege. Yeah.
Okay.
It's correct. Okay. That's the creation of the analytic privilege with some screenshots. Another concept inside the analytic privileges is the following. Obviously, let's assume a real case with what we have seen so far. So I have, for example, a reporting, so some views to report on cost center. And so I then have different people, different users that have different cost center responsibility. I would like to assign the same view, so I don't want to create one view per cost center, so I have just one view, but then I would like, using the analytic privileges, to restrict the access to the specific cost center related to that user. Let's assume I have a lot of cost centers, hundreds, for example. This will result in hundreds of analytic privileges that I have to create and maintain. To obviously that's not achievable, that's not possible or feasible. Then to manage this kind of cases, SAP introduced something called dynamic analytic privileges. The dynamic analytic privileges concept, it's a concept where I have just one analytic privilege, but inside the analytic privileges I can dynamically retrieve the filter for the specific user. How I do that? Well, to do that, I can basically just create the analytic privilege here, and in the assign restriction, instead of assigning a value for my restriction, I assign more a store procedure. So a part of code, a piece of code, a program, if you want, running directly inside the database to retrieve my filter. So instead of having a fixed filter like before, I have a dynamic filter where the store procedure execute whatever logic that's a really open framework. That means by default I don't have anything prepared. I have myself to create the store procedure and to design and then implement whatever logic I would like to implement to retrieve the list of values for my filter. You see here we have a really easy example, probably even a stupid example, but it's just to show you what can be the structure of this dynamic analytic privilege, where I have one store procedure. Here in the middle you see the code of the store procedure, and I basically just select this pub ID. This pub ID, publication ID, is exactly the filter I would like to set here, because that's the filter for the value publisher. And then what I do is I select this value from a table that I maintained, I create before, and where I have my user, so the list of users and users that I have in my system, plus the publication ID here. So basically, I select the pub ID value from the row where the username is the same accessing this particular view. When I do that, and when this is done, basically, I will be able, with this user, with this analytic privilege assigned to it, to see only the content related to the mapping here in the table. So student 04 will be able to use to see all the rows where pub ID is equal 1 or 3, and student 5 only the one where pub ID is equal 2. Also, this concept is really similar, or there is a similar concept in the analysis authorization as well for dynamic retrieving the values.
Just a question on next procedure. So, I mean, when you've defined this, do you not need to define the schema name? So I see you don't have to define student. Well, I presume the schema here is the package is student. Do you have to say select star from student.04.authorized privileges?
Yeah. You have to define everything. I can show you an example of this that I did in the system. And yes, the answer is yes. You need to define everything. So you need one or more than one table where you will maintain the mapping between the users and the value. And you need also, obviously, a store procedure to be built. Here you see an example. It's still the same view, but I have created another analytic privilege, and in this case this analytic privilege has still a restriction on the column or on the attribute called business unit code, but in this case the filter is not anymore a fixed. Here we have the option to select fixed or procedure, but it's a repository procedure. So I have created in the repository a procedure. I can show you now that the content is this procedure here, and this procedure basically contains some logic that I need to retrieve all the values that I need here in the filter. The procedure looks like this. If I go here, that's my procedure in the repository, and basically the procedure, it's really easy. I simply say that I select the business unit code from a particular table that is in this schema, demo security, and is this table here. Now, that table itself, it's also something that I defined, but you remember we said that the issue with the objects is when you create objects directly in the catalog, because then the ownership is belonging to the user who created these objects. But if you work in the repository, you don't have this issue because everything will be generated as this repo. And actually, all the objects that you have in the catalog can be generated from the repository. So in my example here, all the objects, so the store procedure, it's a repository object, HDB procedure that then generates the store procedure in the catalog. The schema, it's also a repository object, HDB schema. I just define in this way, and this generates a schema automatically when it's activated. So this kind of objects can generate a schema. The table, users with departments, it's also users with departments here. It's also a repository object where you see I define the structure of my table here. So the table name, the schema where I would like to place this table, to store this table, the type of table, and then all the columns that I would like to have here. And when this object is then created, generated, basically from the catalog, I can see the schema with the object inside. So demo security, and then I have my tables here. users with department is the table that I was referring to. That is the object that was generated when I create these things. And when I work in this way, so when I work always using the repository as a source or as the place where I develop everything, then I don't have any issue related to authorizations, because these objects here, so the schema, the tables, they belongs directly to sysrepo. So when I create a new role, for example, and I would like to authorize these objects that I have created here to the role, it can be automatically done because the role will be activated using sysrepo. The objects belongs to sysrepo, so sysrepo will have the authorization on these objects by default without doing any grant or on any further activity in the system. On the other way, if I do create something directly in the catalog, then to create repository objects, repository roles on these objects, I will have to authorize sysrepo for that. Let me show you, select from schemas. And here we can see that demo security was created by sysrepo. So the schema owner is sysrepo, even if I created this object and I activate the object.
So everything that we do through the UI, it's creating some kind of effective, well, let's just call it a file here, a SQL stored, some kind of SQL statement here, and presumably that's the same for the role. So I mean, I presume I could come here in that demo role sample, HDB role, I could build that through the UI, adding in the object privileges and data analyst privileges, but presumably I can just modify that set of SQL statements in there. Can I do that?
Sorry, what do you mean with SQL statement?
Well, so if you open up that demo role sample HDB role, just on the left-hand side there.
Yes.
Yeah, so presumably that has been created from when I.
Okay. Now I got what you're saying. Yeah. So this is because you have the double. You have two different options to create and maintain roles. One is using the syntax. That's only true for repository roles, obviously. Mm-hmm. So one is using the syntax here. The syntax is really easy at the end. You just have to specify what is the type of privilege, the name of the object, and then if there is the requirement, also the action. So you see that for catalog SQL object, this one I have execute, for this schema I have select, then I have this analytic privilege, for example, that is associated to this role, and this package with all these actions on the package. So yes, I can do it from here. I can, as I showed you before, I can from here, from the web IDE, I can open the same role and check the content as well. And let me check that. Okay, here I can open the role, this one, and if I open by default the role, I see the graphical environment because that's the default one. But I can also right click, say open with, and then say text editor, and at this point I will see exactly the same that I see in HANA Studio. Okay, so that's in the web ID you can choose between these two different views, so the syntax or the graphical. Obviously they represent exactly the same thing, it's just a different way to manage and to see the content. In the HANA Studio the only possibility that I have is to open the content with the syntax itself, so I cannot see the graphical environment, it's not available here.
Yeah. Presumably, can you, from a security perspective, so security people, well, so when customers start off, this is new, and I would imagine if you don't get these terms right, then you make a mistake, the role doesn't work properly or doesn't generate, or can you prevent people modifying this so they have to go through the UI, or just to limit the opportunity for mistakes?
No, I mean, you cannot limit the thing that someone can check or can change the text here with the syntax or the graphical. No, because you are changing exactly the same thing in the same way. No, you are. It's just a different because the difference here is not on the system itself. It's just a difference on the user interface. So these are two user interfaces. That on the system, from a system perspective, do exactly the same thing. It's just that this is able to translate the graphical thing in the code, and yeah. But obviously, you are still able to limit people or preventing people to change the role overall, because that will be contained in a particular package, and the other, your developers or whoever, will work in another one. But no, you cannot limit these two interfaces. No.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Dynamic analytic privileges. I don't know how interested are you with on analytic privileges, if this is something you will have to do or you will have to manage. I still have one thing related to that, that